the mouse will die, the keyboard will die, the tablet as as we know it will die. They will all disappear and replaced by something VR. Let's talk about VR, and let's talk about VR for production, not for playing games. So I recently got a Oculus Rift, and I thought it would suck, but it doesn't. Prior to getting it, I kind of thought that the whole VR thing was kind of a gimmick, using it to play games and stuff like that, but to create it just looked very cumbersome and painful and awkward, basically. So I thought it was just gonna die, especially the fact that you have to wear this thing on your head and you have to move around and all of that stuff. And also when you see people using it, or recordings of people like creating something in it, you see like the camera jittering and it's difficult to select stuff and whatever. I thought it was kind of a waste of money, and I was completely wrong. I changed my mind completely after using it for about a week. I'm talking about the Oculus Rift, but it doesn't matter which one. I am pretty convinced that in a few years, everyone in the CG industry who creates, they will be wearing a VR headset and will be creating in VR. The mouse, the keyboard, and the tablet will die. Or even tablet, I think, are going to completely disappear. There were reasons why I thought, aside from the fact that it's a clunky thing to wear and it looks a little bit awkward, there are other reasons why I thought it was kind of a gimmick. Prior to purchasing it, I did some research and I saw a lot of artists creating really cool looking stuff in VR. But when I looked into, the kind of the structure of what they were creating, so not the final visual piece, but what the piece was made up of, I also saw immediately that the geometry, for example, that was generated would never be useful in the current 3D pipelines, for example, in game development. And I still kind of see there's a huge problem there. Like, the geometry is super dirty. It's basically, like the stuff that you output from this kind of 3D drawing software like Tilt Brush and Quill. They're just tubes, with kind of randomly generated geometry. It's not clean in any way. I'm sure you could find ways around using it in real production for the use of game production or film or something like that, but it's not quite there yet. The 3D sculpting software is a little bit better. The geometry, it's kind of like decimated or Dynamesh geometry that you get out of it, which is, we already use that, and then you can still retopologize it. But sculpting in VR is already better than sculpting in ZBrush. What I mean is that the experience of sculpting in VR is better, and it is 6 times better, or I don't know what the correct number would be, but basically the idea is that you have 6 dimensions of working in space. You can move your brush in 3 dimensions, which you can't really do in using ZBrush on your 2D monitor. And then you can move around your asset as well, which is 3 and 3 is 6, whatever. But that sounds interesting or weird, but experiencing and working in it is a completely different thing, and I don't think words do it justice. It is so significantly better that any kind of advantage that you have in terms of tools and just polishing ability that you have currently on 2D software, and when I say 2D software, I actually mean 3D software that you use on your 2D monitor. It's kind of overshadowed by the power of working in VR, just the feeling of the immersion of it, and the current software that you have to create in VR. It's lacking a lot of stuff, but it's already very good. And it's only been around for a few years or less. Like, most of it is just out of beta. And there's stuff that you can do in there that you not only can you not do it in the traditional software that you have on desktops, but you will never be able to do it unless they change their kind of input. or interface, which would be the VR interface. And I'm sure they will. So I'm sure software like Pixologic, ZBrush, Blender, Maya, they will kind of change their input to have a VR input for sure. They will have to, because otherwise the software will die. So, but anyway, like I don't want to speculate on that. But what I do want to kind of speculate on or predict is the fact that in the next 5 years, VR is going to completely take over the digital creation space. Right now, you can use VR professionally, and some studios already do. I'm talking about game studios where especially concept artists do some creation in VR. But I can see in the next 5 years that will be actual asset creation will happen in VR as the tools get better, and they're getting better very rapidly. I'm pretty sure that if you walk into a game studio 5 years from now, all of the 3D artists, the concept artists, the animators, they will all be wearing headsets and using some kind of 3D input device like you have today. Maybe it'll look a little bit different, but essentially the mouse will die, the keyboard will die, the tablet as we know it will die. They will all disappear and replaced by something VR. My suggestion to anyone working in the industry today in a creative capacity, if you're an animator, 3D artist, concept artist, storyboard artist, get a VR headset and start getting used to it, start using it. Don't spend too much time on old and dying software and old and dying pipelines. I know that sounds very harsh, but all of those pipelines and all the knowledge that you have about those pipelines and the knowledge about your tools and your shortcuts, and they are actually kind of useless because they will be gone, they will die, they will disappear. Old tools and old workflows will just look like some dumb, cumbersome process compared to what we will have in a few years when everything will be done in VR. And I know that sounds a bit weird if you've never messed around with creating stuff in VR, but the difference between like the interface, the creation interface, the way that you use the tools and the way that your tools react to your input in VR compared to traditional software on your desktop, there's no doubt that the one is superior over the other. And I know it sounds kind of crazy and it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. I've been working in this industry for 10 years and I've seen changes. I've seen when ZBrush came along and 3D sculpting had a significant impact on how pipelines changed and workflows changed. And when PBR came along and Substance Painter changed the way that we texture today, and those are kind of big changes, but they are not comparable to the change that will come. You will wake up and you will wonder what the hell happened, and it won't be comparable to any change that has happened before. It won't be comparable to, for example, how tablets changed the industry, how Wacom and how your Intuos or Cintiq changed. It won't be comparable to that. It's a completely different thing. It's much more significant, and it will entirely change the way that you work. So my advice again is, if you are a creator, if you're planning to work in the industry, or if you're interested to work in the industry, even if you're in school, you have no experience, but you know that you want to work in the CG industry, get a VR headset, get an Oculus or a Vive or whatever, mess around with Quill, mess around with Medium, NMVR. There's a whole bunch of software out there. There's a whole bunch more upcoming. It's 100% the future. So if you are someone who is starting out, or if you're someone who has been in the industry like me for over a decade, and you're planning to stay in the industry, like that's the thing that you should be spending your time on. Forget about watching all those Substance designer tutorials about how to create materials and which nodes to use, and that will be done by machines. You will have to worry about the creative side. And that is the beauty of those VR tools today, is that they purely focus on the creative side. Yes, you still need to know how to be creative and kind of put your creative ideas into some kind of reality. And that does require practice, and it requires, knowledge, but that knowledge is knowledge that will not disappear. The knowledge of how many nodes there are in Substance Designer is different from the knowledge of color theory, of how light works, what good composition is, what good design is. But those are things that will be valuable for a much longer time than your knowledge of which shortcuts do what in whatever application you have currently on your desktop. The other thing I want to highlight that I'm really excited about is that something that I'm predicting, I could be wrong about this, but I don't think so, is that another thing that VR is doing is it's kind of lowering the figurative wall between industries and between groups. So for example, someone who is working in the industry who creates characters for games, they can play games, they can be a gamer. That's an easy wall to cross. But a gamer, the wall that they have to cross to create characters for games professionally, that's a much bigger wall. That's a much higher thing to climb, And I see this user interface, this VR user interface and way of working, lowering those walls significantly. I see a lot of people who did not have the ability to create stuff now will have the ability to create stuff, because it'll be much more accessible and much more encouraging as well, because the tools that are currently there to create, they're just, you don't have to worry about how to navigate, what shortcut keys you need to press to do what. There will be some kind of merging between the game space and the creation space. Those two will start blending a lot, and you can see it in the software that's there. The software is just, it's almost like a game to use it. It's equally fun, and it's kind of equally accessible. Some games are more complicated on how to play than how you should paint in Quill or how you should sculpt in Medium. So that's something to be really excited about, is that there's going to be a huge influx of more people creating and contributing to kind of the digital creation space. Again, I'm super excited about this, and I know that there's a bunch of you out there that are probably super skeptical about that, but I would love to hear your thoughts. Let me know what you think about this in the comments, if you're as excited about it as I am. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later and hopefully share some more VR work in the future. Bye.